What's going on, everybody? It's another Swam podcast episode, and today we got Howdy in with us.
Howdy.
Howdy. So Howdy just feels like talking to everybody because, whatever. But I'll hand it over to him and let him do his thing.
All right, well, we didn't do an episode like we usually do last Wednesday with the two of us, and the reason for that was I was busy at a concert last Wednesday, which is understandable because, live music kind of takes precedent over a lot of things, even though the podcast is very near and dear to me. But I went to two concerts last week. I'm going to talk a little bit about both of them. The first one was...
Britney Spears.
No, but to get slightly off topic for a few seconds, my first concert ever was almost Backstreet Boys because my aunt won tickets off KRZ and she couldn't use them, so she gave them to me and my parents. But that ended up not happening because we went up to Montage. The show was so crowded, we had to take a shuttle bus up from where the baseball stadium is, and we didn't even get on a bus yet. We could already hear music playing, so my parents were like, yeah, these tickets were free, and none of us care about Backstreet Boys enough to see this, so that ended up not being my first concert, which is kind of all right.
You did not want it that way.
No, I did not. But besides the fact that I did not want it that way, we'll get back on topic for something that happened in the year 2024. So last Wednesday, I went to the FM Kirby Center, which is on the square in Wilkes-Barre. And personally, it's one of my favorite venues. And the last 2 years or so, they've been doing a really good job booking shows that are a little more up my alley, like a little more in the, whether it be like a jam band realm or like alternative rock. Like, it's kind of just been like trying to cater to a different audience, but ticket sales have been good, so I hope they keep it up. But last Wednesday was a band called Beat. Now, Beat is a band that's basically a touring only project, and the whole purpose of it is it contains two musicians named Adrian Belew and Tony Levin. And the main reason this tour is because those guys are both members of the band King Crimson, who were a really influential progressive rock band from the late 60s, 70s, and 80s. And those two that I already mentioned wanted to go out and focus on playing songs from three of King Crimson's 80s albums, which don't seem to get a lot of attention. And while they couldn't get the full lineup on board, those two were involved, and they got two major name musicians to fill in the blanks for this one. They got Steve Vai on guitar, who's a very renowned... I don't want to call him a shred player because he does a little more than that, but just like one of those guitar virtuoso types, like just has a very unique style, and like a lot of his music's instrumental because it kind of just speaks for itself.
Is he better than Slash?
You know what? At the end of the day, he probably is. Yeah, I mean, Slash is pretty damn good, but like Slash does what Slash does, and that's about where that begins and ends. Whereas Steve Vai could do what he does and do what Slash does if he really wanted to.
So he's a poser.
Basically, if he wanted to be. And the drummer for this band is Danny Carey, who's the drummer for Tool. And I think that was a big factor in the ticket sales for this show because I even ran into a guy prior to the show, and he didn't know anything about King Crimson's music besides knowing about the band. But he was like, "Oh, I'm a big Tool fan, big Danny Carey fan. Got a ticket just to see him play in a venue this small," which I mean, I don't blame anybody for that because when Tool does tour, which really isn't that often, they typically play like arena-sized venues. So seeing anybody from that band perform in a venue as small as the Kirby Centers was a pretty big deal, actually. So yeah, that show was... I'm not even really that familiar with that era of King Crimson, but just seeing those four guys on stage who are all really talented just do their thing was a good time. So I mean, the first show was that show that night was a lot of fun. So I'm glad I got a ticket. Got to see some good music.
I don't mean to cut you off, but
Yeah.
I apologize to everybody who's potentially watching this, all like three of you. This video is ass, and it keeps blinking in and out of just rustic crap and nice clear picture, but that's my fault for buying a junky camera from China. Trump would not approve.
I should be talking about disco music. I could just lie and say we got a disco ball going in the room right now, but
Happy Fappy.
cat's out of the bag now, so that's no longer a possibility.
Should have called it Swam Dandy.
Yeah.
All right, keep going.
Well, that was the first concert I went to last week. Thursday was a show at the same venue, the Kirby Center, but a totally different realm of the rock world. It was a show headlined by Daughtry, who is obviously the project fronted by Chris Daughtry, who was a former contestant on American Idol. I forget what season, but
Kelly Clarkson.
yeah. So like, I think his first album from the band came out in 2006. So he probably was a contestant in like 04 or 05, I would imagine.
He didn't win.
He didn't
right?
win. I believe he only finished in like third or fourth place that year, actually. But he ended up going on to have a pretty successful career as a rock artist. And it's kind of notable in the fact that of all the people from American Idol who have gone on to have pretty successful careers, he's really the only one that like primarily did it in like a rock realm. Like he's like, I mean, he's not hard rock. He's certainly not heavy metal, but I mean, he's a little harder than what you would consider pop music also. So it's like kind of like a healthy medium.
I was talking to a guy at work about it. He said his new album is a little heavier than
it is actually.
what
I
it
was going
used
to
to
mention
be.
that he's currently supporting a new EP that he just released. I think it has 6 or 7 tracks on it, and he played 4 or 5 of those songs at the show last week, and they definitely were noticeably harder than a lot of the stuff that people famously know him for. And it was actually kind of funny overhearing people in the crowd talking, because I think a lot of the people who are fans of his early material are kind of like disappointed in the new direction, because I heard a lot of people saying like, oh, well, you know, his voice is still good, but he's going to, if he's like going to start doing these like borderline like scream vocals, it's going to bother people. And I'm like, his first album sold like 6 or 7 million copies. Like, he can pretty much do what he wants at this point. Like, it doesn't really matter who it bothers at this point. I mean, he sold out the Kirby Center, which not a lot of people do when they play there. So, I mean,
I like country music, so I got no horse in this race.
well, he did do a pretty midway through the show. He did a brief acoustic section, which was really cool. He did a slow version of his song "Home," which is one of his bigger hits. But then something that actually surprised me was he did an acoustic cover of the song Change by Deftones, which the original's like one of the more notable songs from like the late 90s, early 2000s new metal movement. And like, even if it was an acoustic version, it was kind of surprising to hear Daughtry break out a cover of that song. And before he played it, I forget the exact way he worded it, but he made a comment about how that was a song that he's like, this is a song that I wish I wrote. So obviously he's a big fan of at least that song, if not Deftones in general. So that was a little bit of an interesting thing to discover that night.
I would imagine he'd be a fan of the song if he wanted to do an acoustic version.
Yeah, but I mean, though, that's their biggest hit. Is that the only song he likes by him, or is he a fan in general? That's the part I'm curious about. But the fact that he played it at all is pretty interesting to me. And then the 2 opening bands of the show are actually really good too. One was called Sleep Theory. Going into the show, I knew a little bit about them. They're a newer hard rock band. Kind of reminds me a little bit of something that would have came out of like the early 2000s, like maybe when like Linkin Park was first coming out. Something kind of like
kind of thing.
Sorta, actually. But they were actually really impressive. They were probably my favorite set of all the bands at that show. They played probably about 9 or 10 tracks, and the sound was really impressive. The singer sounded really good. The Kirby has a pretty good sound setup, so as long as a band has like their instruments set up the right way and actually knows how to perform the right way, they tend to sound pretty good there.
Not like the good old Wachovia Arena.
Yeah.
The best acoustics
Yeah.
everywhere.
Something changed there too, though. The last couple of shows I've seen there don't sound as bad as it used to, which is a good sign. And then the other opening band at this show at the Kirby was a band called Devour the Day, who I don't know anything about going into it. I looked into them. Apparently, they had a song that like hit the top 5 or 10 on the rock charts about 10 years ago, and I listened to it on Spotify. It's a good song, but I definitely don't remember it from when it was on the charts.
What
But
was the song called?
Good Man, I think it was called, or something. Like I said, it's actually a really good song. They played it at the show, but it's got something like 14 or 15 million plays on Spotify, and apparently was a top 10 rock chart single in like 2014, but like totally escaped my radar even back then, which is odd to me. But like I said, glad I discovered it when I did, because they were really good live. They had a pretty short set. They only played maybe 6 or 7 songs, but they were the first band on a show with 3 bands, so I can't really be surprised. But
Yeah.
they were good for what they were, and I mean, I listened to a few more songs after the fact, and they don't sound too bad either. So I mean, I think it does seem like Daughtry's trying to lean into like a little bit of a harder rock sound just based on the 2 bands he brought out to open for him, because like they weren't exactly what I would have expected him to bring out, and I mean that in a good way. So
That's all
hopefully he
good.
keeps up with this sound, and maybe we could see him chart a little bit of new territory for himself. I believe that this new album is his first not released through a major label, so he probably has a little bit more creative freedom for what he wants to do and doesn't have anybody in his ear being like, write this, write that. So he probably has a little bit more freedom this time around, so maybe we'll hear more of what he really wants to be doing right now, which is exciting. So we'll have to keep our eyes on that too.
Probably keep your ears on it too.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Eyes, ears. Just don't keep your mouths on it because that's a little weird. But,
I'm just saying the ears usually help with music,
well, yeah,
typically.
typically.
Unless
Although
you're
I know some.
unless you're deaf and you listen to them in braille. I mean, that'd
Well,
be pretty interesting, I
hey,
suppose.
I know some people who are deaf or at least partially deaf that go to concerts on a regular basis. I don't know how they do it, but they know what they like, man. So
Probably the beats,
that's what I've heard.
the
Something to
the
do with
bass.
like they can tell from rhythm sections and stuff, like kind of
Yeah,
what
they
the
they
energy level is. Which, hey,
feel it in their chest. I mean, this one stripper, she was deaf and she just danced to the beat of the music when she was stripping. I mean, it was weird. And then she leaned into my ear to ask me if I'd go to and I almost just lost my shit laughing.
well, hey, I mean, talk about somebody who's just
Hey,
taking the circumstances and just making an opportunity out
she
of
was
them.
pretty
So
hot. I mean,
hey,
she
there you
didn't
go.
dance too well
Yeah,
to the beat and didn't really make much sense. But hey, I
hey,
give her props.
exactly. We can dig that part. Uh, but yes, we'll be back on our regular schedule with these videos because I probably won't be going to another concert for about 2 months now, which is a pretty long break by my standards. But I had a pretty good 2024 as far as shows went. Saw some favorite artists of mine that I've never seen before that I finally got on the list. Biggest one for me this year that I never saw was probably finally getting to see Beck. That was a pretty cool concert.
Beck's
Uh,
got some weird stuff. I'm sure that was a riot.
it was, and it was a pretty interesting setup because it wasn't just like a typical show with his band. It was a collaboration show with an orchestra. So basically, the way the show was set up was for probably about the first hour or so of his set. It was just him focused on a lot of his slower songs and like doing orchestral versions with like which included members of his band, but also like the full orchestra. So kind of gave you like a different interpretation of a lot of his songs, which I mean anybody who's remotely familiar with Beck knows that like he's touched upon a lot of styles of music in his career. And he's always had like a real goofy sense of humor. So like it was kind of interesting seeing him like kind of take things in a little bit more of a serious direction for a little while. But like it kind of just showed that like the guy's really talented. He's not just like it's not all a joke. But
Didn't he have a weird thing on Futurama?
yes, he did. I have not seen the episode in a while, but there is an episode of Futurama. Uh, I forget what season. It's one of the earlier ones, but yes, Beck has a pretty prominent role in one episode of Futurama. I forget how he plays into the plot, but there's definitely a line in there somewhere where he talks about the word Odelay being a
Yep.
real word in the dictionary. Which again,
Yep.
if you're a Beck fan, Odelay is his biggest,
No, I
and
think he referred to it as the
the
Bectionary.
Bectionary. That's right. But I just love that reference because Odelay was the album that made me a Beck fan, and it's probably the best one he's ever done, in my opinion. So I just appreciate that a lot. But yeah, like I said, I saw a lot of good bands this year, saw a lot of good variety of music, but Beck was probably one, like, that's been one I've been trying to see for a long time. So finally making that happen was a big one for me. So that was probably my personal concert highlight of this year. Primus at the Kirby Center was a very good show. 311 at Montage was a very good show. King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard in Philadelphia was absolutely phenomenal. That was probably the best show I saw this year, but Beck was probably the most important one just because I've been wanting to see him since I was in elementary school. So yeah, live music, man. It's always a good thing for me.
Well, hell, I even saw live music this year. I saw Journey.
See, and I was not at that show, and I wanted to be there. So you got one up on me in the
Oh, yeah.
concert realm.
Journey and Toto.
Yeah.
It was I jammed out to Africa. It's pretty good. The Journey singer, what's his name?
Uh, Arnell something, I think is Arnell Pena or
Yeah, their
Pena,
new
something like
singer.
that.
Like
Yeah.
he sounds pretty close to the original guy. I mean, he's exceedingly Asian, and
I
like,
believe, yeah, I think he's from the Philippines
yeah,
originally.
you can tell that he's very Asian. But like he sounds pretty good. I mean, I won't lie, he
I've
sounds
heard
pretty
that.
good.
And he's been with them for quite a while now.
Yeah, a
Probably
lot.
15 or 20, maybe not 20 years, but it's got to be getting pretty close to that. It's
I'd
been a
say
long
10
time.
to 15. And
Yeah.
like when you see him, you just don't. But no, he's pretty good.
And you know what? That's pretty cool because I could do a whole episode on the fact of like there's so many rock bands, particularly from the 70s and 80s at this point, who are carrying on with one or even in some cases zero original members of the band, but are still going out there and playing those songs and bringing in those money from ticket sales. And it's like, where do you draw the line, man? Like, when do you stop being that band and start being a tribute band? Like, so I give Journey props for bringing somebody in that like a lot of people say, hey, no, he's no Steve Perry, but like people actually like him. They still get to play arena-sized venues. They're not playing bars like some of these bands are. So,
Yeah, I saw him at the arena. What the
so
hell? What the hell?
Mohegan Sun.
Mohegan Sun. Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, I mean, props to Journey for just actually getting a replacement singer that, even though they never made any hits with him at the front, they could still go out there and play their old hits, and people still go out there and they're still willing to call that Journey. Like that's says a lot about his appeal. So I mean, even though I'm not a huge Journey fan myself, aside from liking most of their hits, but got to give the band credit for being one of the very few success stories as far as that stuff goes.
yeah. Music is what makes the world go around.
It does.
I just want to show off my awesome stitch job.
Yes.
It's my work shirt. You don't got to do it right. It's just got to keep you warm.
Yes. It doesn't have to look good. It just has to have some functionality to it. That's all.
It's functionable.
There you go.
Well, I think that about wraps her up for today.
Yes.
That was a good segment. Lots of music. Stay swamming.
Yes.
Coin
Next
that.
week we'll switcheroo again, and we'll pick a topic that Swam could actually contribute more than 2 minutes to, and I'll keep my yapper shut for a little while.
I don't know
So
much about anything. I just have
yeah.
average knowledge about most things.
Hey, that is literally the part of the name of the podcast.
Yeah,
So
straight,
let's keep it going, man.
straight white average male.
Yes.
Howdy.
Plus the occasional music rambling by Howdy himself.
How diddly do. Wasted.